everybody, it's Adam with Adam Haney Home Loan Team. And being that it is Halloween 2023, so much happening in our world, I thought I would at least try to ease your concerns, your fears perhaps, about what is happening in the real estate market, specifically if there is going to be a real estate bubble or a housing crash, because we've heard a lot about that lately in the media. And I wanted to share some charts with you and some graphs and see, is it something that we really need to fear? Or is it more like what Winston Churchill said, that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself? Let's jump in and take a look. So part of the reason why a lot of home buyers are having a hard time justifying purchasing right now is because there are a lot of people in the media that have talked about a recession and are hyping that a housing bubble is coming that could be due to a recession. However, if we look at the facts and we look at history, we see that the story is much different. This chart shows recessions going back to 1960, indicated by the tall vertical blue lines. These are the periods of recession. And the white line is the Case-Shiller Home Price Index, which is gradually increased. So we see that through these recessions, home prices stayed steady or even increased. The exception being the Great Recession in 2007, when the housing market crashed. Now, many people erroneously say that it was the recession that caused the housing market to crash, but in actuality, it was the exact opposite. It was the housing market crashing that caused the recession. And really what led to it is a glut of inventory, too many homes being built, not enough buyers, and very lax lending guidelines that basically allowed anyone to get a loan without proving they had the ability to pay for it. So when we look at supply, it's measured by the completions of homes from builders who then put them on the market. And demand is determined by household formations. So for instance, an adult child moves out of their parents' home into their own home they rent or buy, that's a household formation. Or a couple gets separated, one person stays in the house, the other one moves into another house, that's a new household formation. And so the other important equation to understand is the demographics. And when we look at the housing crash that started in 2006, 2007, we have to look back 33 years prior. Why? Because the median age of a first-time home buyer is 33 years old. So we go back 33 years from 2006 to 1973. What happened? Well, at that time, Roe versus Wade just passed and abortions were legalized. Consequently, we saw a big drop-off in the rate of births in the early through mid-70s. So that when we fast forward 33 years later to 2006, we have a huge drop-off in household formations. And that drop-off in household formations persisted for the next 6 years. Meanwhile, the orange lines indicate the inventory that had been built for these household formations, not realizing that there wasn't the backfill from the 70s to get these people into homes. Well, how does that compare to today's scenario? Today's 33-year-old was born in 1990, and this is the millennial generation. If we look at this chart, we see the most births since the baby boom generation. And so what that means is we have more people than in previous years coming of age to finally buy or rent a home. So one of the other things that's important to understand about the housing crash is the vacancy rates. So if we look at the vacancy rates from the mid-80s up until the housing market got really hot, vacancy rates were around 1.5%, 1.75%. But then the vacancy rates started going up sharply because there was so much speculative building by home builders and speculative buying by buyers that there actually weren't people getting into these homes. And what happens is at a certain point, the carrying costs become too much. So what do? You have to sell that home at a discount. And that precipitated a domino effect where we saw housing prices literally fall off a cliff. But if you compare the vacancy rates that were just under 3% during the peak of the housing crash to the current vacancy rates in 2023 that are just under 1%, we're at around 0.8%, it's a totally different picture. Now, the inventory back in 2007 was about 4 million available homes. But compare that to today's inventory in 2023, there's only a quarter as many homes inventory, and that's with about 30 million more people in the country. So it's way out of balance. Now, understanding the inventory, we got to look beyond just the face value number of a little over a million homes that are in the inventory, because that number also includes homes that are under contract. So if a home is in escrow, it's still considered part of the inventory, but in reality, it's not available for sale because somebody else is already buying that home. Therefore, what we have to do is deduct those from the inventory to get the actual inventory of about 600,000 homes. And so when we look at that number of 600,000 homes compared to historical norms from about 2017 up to the pandemic, we had about 1.2 million homes that were available inventory. Well, now we're about half as much. So again, the supply and demand equation is way out of balance. But the other reason why it's so important to not bet against the housing market is just because of the remarkable record it's had. Any championship boxer would be envious of this record of 73, 7-1, which means that over the last 80 years, 73 of those years have been up, 7 years have been flat, and there was one period where we went through a down cycle. But the reason why people feel that we're due for a correction is because we've seen the home prices go up so much in 2020, 21, and even 22. And so therefore they think, well, we must be due for a down cycle. But if you look at history, that really is not supported. From 1943 through 1947, prices compounded up 118%, and then the prices went up higher for another 43 straight years. From 1974 through 79, home prices compounded up 93%, and then prices went up higher for another 10 years, only before coming down 1% in 1990. And then after that, they went up another 14 consecutive years. But people want to focus on the period from 2007 to 2011, the Great Recession, the housing crash, because that's what's most recent in people's memories, and we're a little bit fear-based. But again, it's a totally different ballgame today than what it was back then. There were roughly 4 million homes in inventory compared to only 1 million homes. And so the table is not set for a housing crash. And therefore, we need to understand the inventory is totally different picture. The demographics, which is to say we have a lot more buyers coming of age to be purchasing this limited inventory. And then finally, the lending standards are much stronger today. So because the lending guidelines are more conservative, more restrictive, the loans are much healthier and therefore able to withstand maybe a downturn in the market. Also, we can't ignore the fact that home prices just continue to go higher despite their already high levels and despite these high interest rates. And we see that the inflection point was in January. It was the last month where we had some downturn in the market. Since then, we've seen month-over-month increases in the home prices. These 5 different home price indices all indicate home prices going up. And if we look at it on a year-over-year pace, we're on pace for about a 6% to 8% increase in home prices. And the numbers that are in yellow indicate all-time highs in real estate values. So the market has been incredibly resilient. Furthermore, if we look at what happened at the last bottom market cycle, so after 2012, from the next 12 months, we had 8% appreciation from 2012 to 2013, but that was with 2.4 million homes in inventory. Remember, we have less than half that many homes today. So much better poised for a market recovery, and it should not be a stretch to see home price appreciation of 5 to 6, 7% in the coming months and year. Now, lastly, let's just look at the interest rates themselves, because this is the sticking point for so many buyers. And that is that the rates today depends on the particular situation, credit score, down payment, etc., but it's close to 8%. So in this scenario where somebody's buying a $750,000 home with 20% down, 8% interest rate, their total payment's going to be around $5,200, which includes everything from the taxes, insurance, principal and interest. It's everything. But what happens if the rate goes down to 7%? Well, now that person with that same $150,000 down payment can afford a $796,000 purchase price. They can afford almost $50,000 more. And if the rates go down to 6%, they can afford almost an $855,000 home. The reason why this is significant is because most economists are predicting that the mortgage rates are going to come down into the low 6% range by the end of 2024. And so what that's going to do is create a rush of buyers who are incentivized by the lower interest rates, which is then going to push home prices up. So the moral of the story is, if buyers can find a home right now that suits them, that they can afford, then now is definitely the time to buy, because they can and they will refinance when interest rates come down. Now, lastly, the scenario on the far right, Homeageddon, 10% interest rate. What happens if interest rates go up to 10%? Well, in that case, the home that someone would have been able to afford at $750,000 now would have had to have come down to $662,000. But this scenario is highly unlikely because with the reality of a recession on the horizon and the fact that recessions always bring lower interest rates, it's much more likely that we're going to see lower interest rates than higher interest rates. So I hope that gives you some historical perspective. And if you're a buyer or a realtor working with a buyer, that this gives you some information to find more treats than tricks in your home price search. Contact me if I can help with anything else.